Sad 9. Dorothy was crying. Why tomorrow? Because they know, he said for the third time. He pounded the bed. They know, they know, they know, and they're not going to wait. Plus Pigeon Day is coming up. It's only going to get worse. Henry wouldn't hurt Nipper. Henry doesn't count. It's the others, she implored. But why? Why can't you just hide him in the house or in my house? They'll find out. He spoke wearily, pacing. They were right in this room last night. The cat was here today. They know everything. They won't give up. What we really ought to do is take him out tonight, under cover of darkness, she blurted out. No! So, he shrugged. Tomorrow. She slumped facing the wall, her forehead leaning into it. Why don't they just let him alone? She looked at him as if the answer were his to reveal. What did he ever do to them? He looked up to the closet shelf where Nipper was roosting. He was born a pigeon, that's what. But how can you do it? She whined. The months of spring and summer had filed his nerves to a point. He was nearly galloping back and forth across the room. Though he muffled the volume of his voice, lest his parents hear, his entire body screamed, How can I do it? How can I do it? Can't you get it through your head? They're gonna kill him. Do you want him dead? Early in the day, Dorothy had seen the unflattened Nerf ball in the street and had retrieved it. She stroked it now in her lap, her voice barely audible. I just don't want him gone. He went to the window. A quarter moon was out. He began to weep. Do you think I do? The next morning they met at 6 o'clock with bikes. Dorothy's bike had a wicker basket fixed to the handlebars. That's where the shoebox went. Palmer had dumped the toy soldier on the bed, poked air holes in the lid, and deposited the pigeon. They had told their parents that they were going on an early morning breakfast picnic to the park. In the basket also lay a box of donuts and many cartons of iced tea. They rode to the park and out of the park and out of town. They rode past the barbecue restaurant and the burnt-out barn and the golf course, whose dew-topped greens looked like silver ponds. They stopped only to switch bikes when Dorothy could no longer bear to transport the basket. They pedaled down roads that they had seen only from a car before, and then down roads that they had never seen at all. The only sounds were the whir of spokes, the crunch of tires. Up and down hills they rode and rode until it seemed they must be in another state, if not in another country. Palmer, leading the way, pulled off the road by a field where horses were grazing. Let's eat, he said. Dorothy took the donuts and drinks from the bike basket. Is this where we let him go? No, not far enough. Not far enough? He punched a straw into an iced tea carton and took a long sip. He shook his head. We have to go as far as we can. Pigeons can find their way back from a long way off. Dorothy broke off a piece of donut and stuck it under the lid of the shoebox. It was immediately snatched from her fingers. I can't even find my way back from here. You're not a pigeon. He bit into a donut. Even far's not enough. It has to be confusing, too. She was alarmed. What do you mean? You're not going to blindfold him? He sneered. No, but something else. You'll see. He had taken only one bite of the donut. He slipped the rest into the shoebox. Let's go. Another endless stretch of riding brought them to an unfenced meadow. Palmer said, Here, and veered into it. Wait, he called back. Dorothy stopped at the roadside and watched Palmer drive her bicycle deeper into the meadow. The wheels jumped. The basket bounced over the clodded earth. Thistletops erupted. Wildflowers wobbled as the bike charged in reckless patterns. Only a few could follow. Circles, figure eights, zigzags, crazy doodles. This went on for many minutes when suddenly the bike bolted on a beeline into the woods beyond. Dorothy waited as long as she could before becoming impatient, then worried. She could not see an inch into the dense tree line. The sun was directly overhead, making a shadowless desert of the meadow. The handlebars of the bicycle were hot. Then, there he was, popping from the woods, pedaling furiously straight at her, the donut box flying in the basket. As he came closer, she saw that his face was red and wet, his mouth twisted. The shoebox was empty. He did not stop nor look at her, but charged with a clatter onto the road. It was a long time before he slowed down, allowing her to catch up. They switched back to their own bikes. They rode in silence. They asked directions at a gas station. They bought sodas and threw away the donuts. Then they coasted the final hill into town. The streets were in shadow. Wearily, they climbed the stairs to Palmer's room. Nipper was waiting on the windowsill. He thought of not feeding Nipper, of not letting him in. Sooner or later, the pigeon would get the hen and fly away forever. He told Dorothy of his idea, hoping she would forbid it. She did. She yelped so loud that he had to clamp his hand over her mouth. Okay, he said. He began pacing. But we have to do something. We've got to get rid of him. Dorothy did not argue. They're not going to give up. No way. Not till they get him. Pacing. They're going to keep sneaking the cat in. They're going to spy on the house. Day and night. They'll wait and wait. Slingshots, BB guns, maybe even poison. Poison! Pacing, arms upthrust. They'll put poison cereal on the roof. Dorothy was laughing. Palmer stopped and scowled. What? She was on her back, on the bed, on the toy soldiers, howling at the ceiling. She dragged herself up, found her voice. Do what you were doing. What? Walk. He took a step. No, walk. She swept her hand back and forth like you were. He resumed pacing, suddenly conscious of his feet. He looked down and saw what she was laughing at. Nipper was pacing, turning when he turned, tracing his every move back and forth across his room. He halted. The pigeon halted. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The next day, his mother confessed. It happened after breakfast. He was in his room. He heard his mother's footsteps coming up the stairs. Normally the footsteps would turn and head for the bathroom or her own bedroom. This time they came straight to his door. She knocked. Palmer, can I come in? Quickly he glanced about the room. He noted 2 white powdery droppings that had neglected to clean up, and a cereal box on the floor. He had been getting lax lately. At least the bird itself had left for the day. He kicked the cereal box under the bed. He composed his face. Come in. She came in smiling. Hi, she said. She waved as if she hadn't seen him in the kitchen 2 minutes ago. Hi, he said. He did not wave. He was standing on one of the powdery poopies. The other was on his desk, which was exactly where she sat. Her left hand, palm down, no more than an inch from the white deposit. He expected her to look around, to inspect the place that she had been asked to stay away from for months now, but she kept looking only at him, smiling. And he saw now that it was not quite her regular smile. There was a goofy quality to it. It was changing, breaking down. I have a confession to make, she said. Her face was sad now, droopy. But it wasn't real, it was pretend, clownish. He said nothing. The smile was back, real and regular. We know you have a pigeon. He could not move or speak. She laughed. Palmer, breathe. He breathed. She held out her arms. Come here. He went to her and was swallowed entirely in her embrace. All strength drained out of him, and all of a sudden he understood how alone he had been and how much he had missed his parents' support. He sobbed. She held him tighter, swaying. From beyond her heartbeat, he heard her voice. Didn't you know things weren't always the way you left them? Didn't you notice that it never got dusty in here? Did you really think that you could keep your mother out of your room in her own house? Actually, yes, he had thought so. She held him at arm's length. He had never seen such a smile. Her eyes were gleaming radiant. Didn't you notice that a new box of Honey Crunchers magically appeared in your closet whenever the old box was almost empty? He stared at her, blinking. Yes, he had noticed, and that's exactly what he thought. Magic! She laughed aloud, hugged him again, released him. Did you think you could have a pet pigeon in the house since, what, January, and Daddy and I wouldn't know about it? I thought you'd be mad, he said. She fluttered her fingers at the door. Go get me a tissue. He fetched a tissue from her room. She used it to wipe the droppings from the desk. And don't forget the one you're standing on, she said, tossing the tissue into the basket. She stared at him. Mad? Why would we be mad at you? He stated the obvious. It's a pigeon. She nodded. Her voice became even softer. I understand. We understand. And we were a little concerned, but not mad. Never mad. But, he did not know how to put it. Dad. She smiled. Don't worry. Your dad's been changing. He didn't even go to watch Pigeon Day last year, much less shoot. She put a hand on his shoulder. One night, don't tell him I told you this. One night he snuck into your room while you were sleeping and stood there with a flashlight at your closet, staring at your pigeon, she chuckled. Take my word for it, that bird is as safe with your dad as it is with you. They talked to him through much of the morning. Palmer told her everything. Nipper's arrival after the snowstorm, the daily wake-up ear peck, the guys and their growing suspicions, tree-stumping Dorothy, spitting on the classroom floor. He wished he had a camera to preserve the look on her face. Refusing the treatment, then he told her of his lifelong fear, that he dreaded the day that he would become 10 and a ringer. His lip quivered, and she made a sound of pain and squeezed him tight to her and stroked his head and his back. After a while, she said, Don't let Nipper go. Keep him. He tried to explain. He tried to make her understand what life was like for him, that there was simply not enough room in town, not this town, for himself, the guys, and a pigeon. His fear was too great, he told her, and his course had been set. So when a day later, Dorothy told him that her family was heading to the seashore for a vacation, Palmer asked her to take Nipper along and release him there. She protested, but in the end, she spoke to her parents, and her parents, as Palmer had hoped they would, agreed to take care of things. Dorothy came for Nipper the night before. She refused to use the shoebox. She carried the sleeping bird across the street in her hands. The next day, Palmer stayed in bed until noon. Despite the heat, he slept with his window shut and locked, the shade drawn. Still he could hear them, Beans and Muddo, squalling like alley cats on the back porch roof. He could hear them raise the screen, knock on the window, work to open it. On the street, they tree stumped him. They planted themselves in front of him so that he had to step around them, only to find them replanted in his new path. It took him half an hour to walk 1 block. They mocked and taunted him. They flicked his ear and spit on his sneakers. Beans bared his green and yellow teeth and breathed baked beans in his face. It was as if he had never been one of them. He's gone, he told them. They laughed. They didn't believe him. He had an idea. Invite them into his room. Let them see for themselves. Maybe then they would believe. Back off. But then he realized that his mother would never again allow them into her house. It then occurred to him that when he thought of the guys, he was really thinking only of 2 of them, Beans and Muddo, not Henry. Henry was one of them, all right, but he was different. Maybe he could sneak Henry into his room, prove it to Henry. The guys agreed. He did not have to convince Beans and Muddo that his mother was dangerous to them, especially in her house. And while it frustrated them that only Henry would have the privilege, they were too curious not to let it happen. Beans looked up to Henry. He tugged on Henry's red and white striped t-shirt until Henry bent down to Beans's height. Check it out good. Don't let him trick you. Henry nodded. Report back to me. Okay. Palmer chose a morning when his mother was out. While Beans and Motto waited, sitting brazenly across the street on Dorothy's front steps, he let Henry into his house. Up in the room, he held out both arms and said, It's all yours. Look all you want. While Henry looked about, poking obediently into the closet, Palmer studied. Henry was so tall that the top of his head grazed the basketball net, and yet somehow he did not give an impression of bigness. On the contrary, he seemed quite small, smaller than Beans and Mutto, smaller even than Palmer. Thanks for the warning, Palmer said to him. Henry peered foolishly into the wastebasket and said, What warning? On the cake. Henry paused and said, Oh, yeah. Palmer watched him search some more. What's your real name? Henry looked startled. His eyes went to the window as if the guys might be lurking there. He never looked at Palmer. Huh? I know Beans' real name is Arthur and Mutto is Billy. Who are you really? Henry dropped to his knees and ducked under the bed. He stood back up. His wide, startled eyes, careful to avoid Palmer, swept across the walls. George, he said, and left the room. He hurried down the stairs. Palmer called, George! Quit! He called. I saw you pulling your little sister in the wagon. But Henry, really George, was already out the door.